All right, if you're still working, you can definitely keep working. Not meant to rush you here, but you can definitely listen as we chat a little bit. Thanks so much for being here tonight on a cold and snowy night. Hopefully you guys had a decent day at school. It's been a while. I'm happy to see your faces. As we discussed in October, the fall is not the most fun time in the world to be a teacher or really a student. So I hope you're hanging in there, but you got that Thanksgiving break coming up soon, and hopefully that longer holiday break. Give you a chance to come up for air. If you've already done the passion poster before, if I've already told you about it, I'm sorry that this is redundant. But this is one of my favorite activities to do with kids. I usually did it on the first day of school. I would do mine and model mine and talk about who I was and what my passions were, what my loves were, what my funds of knowledge were. And that opened the door up to some cool conversations as well. But then I had each student do it, and if they were comfortable, I had them say their name and then talk about their passions. And then we put them up around the classroom. One of the major levers for me was that I taught writing. So it was an easy way when kids were stuck with ideas. They're like, I can't think of anything to write about. You could have them look back up at the poster or even somebody else's poster. So, there are some passions you have. There are some passions that other people have. But it's a nice, quick way to get to know people. And to that end, do I have any brave souls who'd want to share either holding up your poster or just describing what's on it? Obviously, we're in a digital format here. It doesn't lend itself super well to physical posters. But do I have anybody that would be willing to share their passion poster?
I didn't finish mine, but I can share it.
Thanks, Chris.
So I did it pretty quick, but I'm Chris, and this is my first online one, so if I haven't met anyone, nice to meet y'all. I put up here my cast iron pan and my grill. I love to cook. I was going to draw all the logos of all the Boston sports teams. I'm a Boston sports fanatic. And then I got some mountains on here. And that's about as far as I got. I like hiking and skiing and a lot of the outdoor Colorado stuff as well.
Be kind to all of us Coloradans after Sunday. I don't think that's going to go super well for us. Don't rub it in too hard.
No.
Anyone else would like to share? Thanks for doing that, Chris. I appreciate it. Anybody else like to share?
I can go. So I did this. I used a scrap of paper because I was like, well, I'll just use a scrap of paper. So it's nicely staircased. So I have singing / choral music. I have helping people be their best selves. I have solving inequities, and not just educational inequities, but inequities around the world. So like, poverty gap between countries. I put soccer, and then I also put my family and my friends, but more my family because I love my family. And I drew a little picture of my family right there.
Remind me, how far away is family right now?
They're in Vermont, so they're really far.
Pretty far. Gotcha. Thanks for sharing that. I'd love to do like 2 more if possible. I love hearing things about you that I don't already know.
I'll go. Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Thanks, Melissa.
Sure. So I was still kind of doodling and filling in, but for me, family was first. And the outdoors, definitely. Got a little tree. And I'm sort of a native. I moved here when I was 2. So I claimed Colorado as home. And I came back to it. So it's definitely my favorite place to be. Right now, learning, I'm just soaking up everything I can. Constantly learning. And kindness is something I'm very passionate about.
Cool. Thank you. What do you mean by kindness? Like kindness? Yeah, that can take a lot of different forms. Say more about that one.
I think just as a way of being in everything you do and exhibiting that to all.
How's that going in the classroom? There were days where I felt that, it's pretty easy to be kind, and then there were days when it's pretty rough. What's your philosophy with that around in the classroom?
That is an excellent question. I always try and step back, and if something's going awry and I don't feel like I'm going to be able to bring kindness to the forefront, I step back and try and look at the situation and figure out where the motivation for what's coming towards me that's making me feel like I can't be kind is. I always look for that what else is going on piece.
Sure. That's great. Thanks for sharing.
Sure.
One more or more, but at least one more.
I can go.
Thanks, Andrew.
So I very quickly just drew it. There's no virtue in looking at it. So the first is a picture of an airplane because I just really love to travel. And I've been doing a lot of it lately, which has been exhausting. Just like little weekend trips that were not really necessarily for pleasure, but actually just like getting away has also been like really fun. A lot of weddings this fall. So I've been doing a lot of that, which relates to another one of just like hanging out with friends. I lived in New York for about 8 years, and I actually just officiated a really good one of my friends' weddings this weekend, and we were all back together, and that was just such an amazing experience. Being able to see everyone and then just like playing such a really cool part in like their lives was just really, really powerful and really cool. I also have reading on here and just listening to music, some of my favorite things to do oftentimes together. We don't have a TV in our living area for like the first time in a while, and I'm really, really excited about it because just like being able to chill and listen to music is just like the best thing. So, yeah.
Awesome. Any new music that's really rocking your world?
Yeah, I've been listening to lots of new stuff. I'm horrible with names, and that's the problem. And the fact that I'm still at school after doing, I had to, because I was away this weekend, I had to reschedule parent-teacher conferences for today and tomorrow. So like my brain is just like not working. So I couldn't even tell you some of the new artists that I've been, but I'll follow up with you and let you know because I'm really excited about some of the stuff I've been listening to.
Cool. Thanks. Thank you all for sharing. Is there anyone with a burning desire to share? All right. I'm trying to scan the room. I'm doing that by like scrolling up and down at the pictures of your videos. Well, thanks for sharing. Hopefully you can see the value in an activity like this. It's an easy way, like I said, to get to know a lot about a lot of people in short order. There's a visual element to it. There's kids doing things different and in different modality. You can post around the room. It's a cool idea. If you would like more ideas or more resources on pulling this off, let me know. I'd love to talk through that with you. I did it every year, and as you can see, one of the student Montserrat, hers was the exemplar there that I showed. It was cool stuff. And it dovetails nicely into our focus for the evening. So you read the Mole Funds of Knowledge text. In academia, that's a fundamental text. It's been around a long time. It's been cited a ton. It's a very seminal foundational text. So spending some time with it is good. You can take it in a variety of ways. We're having sort of a big question today. We've typically balanced very practical and very theoretical PLCs. Last time we met, it was group work, more practical. This one, Funds of Knowledge, more theoretical. But I do want to allow ample time at the end, that hour, maybe even some extra time for you. Maybe I could end this early for you to dig into the reflection part, but we'll talk about that at the end. But it involves looking at what other teachers have done and seeing some practical steps to doing some of this work. We just did the passion posters. We're going to talk about culturally sustaining pedagogy and its ties to funds of knowledge. Then I'll set up the reflection. We'll do a quick look forward at the coursework and videos coming up. So culturally sustaining pedagogy is sort of the new buzzword for culturally responsive teaching or culturally responsive pedagogy. Essentially, it just goes a little bit deeper. I took 2 paragraphs of a reading. The first one is very wonky and very sort of impenetrable. The second paragraph tells a little bit more in more easily digestible language. But I really want to focus on the yellow words there. As teachers, we should be critically enriching the strengths rather than replacing deficits. I think this is it's a hard topic. It was hard for me to get to. When things went wrong, it was easy for me as a young teacher to blame the kids or want to change certain things. And certainly there are behaviors and there are words these children use and there are other things that they do that do need to be changed for the safety and inclusion of many. But my teaching practice really flipped when I started thinking about what are their strengths, what can they bring in the classroom, how can I bolster that, as opposed to treating them like empty vessels, and trying to fix what wasn't maybe perfect in them. And that's a tough place to get. And I empathize when teachers struggle, and I empathize when teachers need to vent about certain behaviors of certain kids in the room. And I think that's fine to a point, just realizing these are human beings. They have assets, and a large part of what we do is affirm who they are as people. And that's sort of what we're going to dig into tonight. This was a quote from the text that you read. We use the term funds of knowledge to refer to these historically accumulated and culturally developed bodies of knowledge and skills essential for household or individual functioning and well-being. I really like the word like funds, right? If you think of a bank account, these are assets that the students have, or the families have, or the community has, and it's up to us to sort of figure that out and value that and use that in the classroom to the best of our abilities. When you read the text and sort of thought about the questions that we had in the pre-reading and your time teaching so far, how do you connect to this quote or to the reading in general, or just this idea of like funds and assets? What did you think of the reading, or what have you learned in your first few months? I'd just like to hear a few thoughts of how this is hitting you.
I can jump in really quickly. Although it'll be in line of that more academic-y thing that kind of, as you preface it. Yeah. I mean, like reading funds of knowledge made me think immediately of like social and cultural capital. And sort of, so like, not to overdo that metaphor as it were, but like, what do we perceive as legitimate, and what do we, in terms of knowledge, and what do we reward? What do we perceive as legitimate knowledge in the first place, or even legitimate ways of thinking, or legitimate kinds of connections, just socially, but then also how does that get reinforced in the classroom, and I think being aware of those two things, one, that socially people are being socialized into like being like certain ways of thinking or certain types of knowledge is being rewarded, and our students are very aware of that, and then two, like making sure that we are not reproducing that, because that can be very gendered, it can be very racialized, it can be very nationalized and that kind of thing. So like, just sort of decentering that in our own pedagogy and rewarding the different kinds of knowledge that our students have, and then leveraging that.
That's really well said. It's big and it's kind of sticky. How do you think about it, like when you're actually in the classroom or when you're planning? Andrew, I don't mean to put you on the spot. I just wanted to, like how does that manifest itself in the moment or in the act of planning and teaching?
Yeah. And that can be really, really hard. And it's so easy to say that, I think, to say like, to do that. I think where it's been coming up the most is actually then, and I guess this is where I'm saying also recognizing that our students have already sort of been socialized into this. Like I have a lot of students who have been exhibiting quite a bit of frustration when it comes to like independent reading or like their literacy block. And even like, I mean, using very ableist language to like demean themselves, like referring to themselves as the R word and that kind of thing, and being really, really frustrated with themselves because they perceive themselves as unable to do a certain task. So I think, two things, one, preempting that and sort of just like, I think kind of building it to what we've been working on up to this point, like that relationship building by getting to know what our students do know or are passionate about, and being like, look at all these things that you already know. We might not always talk about them in a literacy block, but you already know so much, but like, then like how can we make those connections? So like, I mean, I teach bilingual literacy. So most of my students are brown, of Mexican or Central American descent, and we just finished up reading Esperanza Rising. And the more that I got to know them and their own immigrant stories and their own immigrant experiences, like we were able to make those personal connections to be like, some of them do know in a very personal way, like what it means to cross a border. And that's a type of knowledge, right? So really sort of leveraging those personal experiences with the academic is something that I've been doing. I think like that's how I've been doing it. And I think part of it's because pedagogically, I'm not sure what else to do at this point. So I'm like like, well, I got relationships, so I'll lean on that for the time being.
It's great. Eliza, I think you're going to speak before.
Yeah, I think that piggybacking off of what Andrew was saying, I think that another thing that I am seeing in the classroom is language, and the idea of code switching is really interesting, especially because I also have heavily Latin American, Latino, Hispanic, whatever term you want to use, Spanish-speaking population, and even not those people, there's such a different sort of way of speaking, and like what language is considered okay in the classroom versus what they're hearing at home. And I think that there is definitely a set of words that are not really acceptable in the classroom, but are very culturally important to those people, those students. And I think that that's really interesting. And so actually, I just started teaching a Spanish class today, actually, and it was so interesting to see some of my students who I didn't even realize how much they've been kind of like pushed down to like not use their Spanish words and like not talk in like a more sort of like heavy Spanish accent, as when they like came into class today, into Spanish class, and were all of a sudden just like blah, 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 and seemed so comfortable. So I think going off of that idea of pedagogy and strengths and funds of knowledge, I think language is a really, really important one that I'm definitely seeing in my students as a form of like feeling either sort of like pushed down or really great. And they don't know how to code switch yet is also another thing.
Yeah. Interesting point. I want to come back to that, especially I think our last question in the PLC is, what do we want to affirm? And then what do we as educators want to push back on that could be considered cultural? So I think coming back to that, specifically about those loaded words that probably are hateful and not needed in the classroom, but they do, you're right, have some cultural worth or some cultural baggage with them that's worth unpacking. Great thoughts from Eliza and Andrew. Anyone else want to say anything, either related to what they said, related to the reading, related to the funds of knowledge you've seen in your own students and how that's manifested itself so far this year?
Yeah, I'll mention something. After doing the reading about looking at students who are the bilingual, being more bilingual, I talked to a couple of my students one-on-one, and it was funny because one student who speaks predominantly Spanish at home and is very fluent in English never even thought to bring his Spanish into school, or that it could be taught. Like, so I went to him and said, you know what, I have books in Spanish. If you want to read and keep strengthening your Spanish, you can be, that continues to grow. I said, do you know that could help you? And it's like no one had ever suggested to that student before. And so it was it was nice for me to change my attitude and offer a service that this young man didn't know that even existed, or even thought that he could or should. And then one little girl I talked with did the same kind of conversation, and she got really excited because she didn't realize that it was an asset. And so I think just changing my attitude and dialoguing with them on what is their, where do they feel their assets are, but then tying it to that we could grow that together, even though I speak no Spanish. They were really excited. A couple other kids were just confused because they don't even know what language they speak at home. So I was like, okay, I'm here to support you in growing as the person that you want to grow into, and you don't have to know on to do the other. And again, I'm working with, these were all like second graders or younger. So some of them are pretty enlightened, like, wow, this is a cool thing. This is okay. So I was pretty excited for them. And wouldn't have thought of that if I hadn't had this class.
Oh, that's great. That's great to hear. That's such a great example too. And you're right. it's one of those moments where, I've been in education long enough that honoring the home language and building literacy in any language is going to help literacy in any other language that you speak. And, that's sort of like taken for granted in the ed world, but you get a lot of political rhetoric about specifically Spanish speakers and their immigration to this country. And they're probably feeling unwelcome. And then when you say something about how cool it is they're bilingual and how you could actually maybe even learn a little bit of Spanish from them, like how cool is that to flip the script right there? Great.
And also like to, again, reflecting on like the parent teacher conferences I just did, like reminding the parents of that, of how like literacy begets literacy, and I think there's this idea because of kind of our social political situation, that isn't actually new per se. Like a lot of families feel that they can't speak or read to their kids in a language other than English. And so they just don't, because they think that it will it'll detract from their students' English literacy. Right. So to really affirm that language and be like, no, even if your kid's reading a book in English, ask them questions in Spanish, or like they can read in Spanish and it'll improve their English literacy as well. That's a conversation that also really, I think, is so important to have with the families, right? Not only for that sort of like feeling like a sense of belonging, but also like in terms of pedagogy, like you said, like educators kind of take it for granted, but there's some major hurdles sometimes with families sort of buying into that idea.
Yeah, well said. I'm going to take a risk here. I don't want you to freak out, Bob, but I want to put you on the spot a little bit, Bob. So Bob teaches at Evergreen High School, and when I was in your classroom, it seemed like most of the students were white. There were some that weren't, but I think we've heard from some teachers that teach like predominantly Latino or students of color populations. I'm curious how you're thinking about this, Bob, when seemingly I think you could say, I'm not saying you are saying this, but seemingly you or a teacher in your position could say, oh, my kids are the same. They're all from, wealthy white families. Funds and knowledge stuff is hogwash. I'm wondering how you're thinking about this, teaching kind of a homogenous group of kids that may be different from the other teachers who've spoken so far.
No, I mean, it's Evergreen's overall affluent and predominantly white, and you don't have many English as a second language kids. It's so that's all accurate. But I think what you do see, at least in my experience, because I've got a general population, I have 9th through 12th graders. It's the full gamut of the kids in the school, and you do. I mean, because it's affluent, if you're not, and there's a good chunk of people who aren't, I think that can be challenging. And so what I try to do is make sure I'm spending some time with those students. Had a real good experience with one who was struggling, whose guardians reached out to me, and it's about limited liability companies, and they had just formed one and worked with that student to bring in some information for extra credit. And he really sort of lit up when I kind of engaged him that way. So
his family was setting up an LLC. Is that what you said?
Different dimension, but there's still aspects like this that you've got to think about.
Gotcha. Sorry, I kind of interrupted you there for a second. So you said the family set up an LLC. Is that what you were saying, or did I miss you? Okay.
So I mean, I'd met the guardians at like a parent night, and right. So they had done that. That's a pretty common thing for a small business, and we'd been talking about it in class as a real point of emphasis. A lot of the students weren't getting it, and this student as well. But once I sort of connected it to what his family was doing, that it sort of clicked. I actually asked him to present to the class for some extra credit, and he was not willing to do that. But still, it was a good experience, and to me, is sort of along the same lines of what we're talking about. It's just a different dimension.
Yeah. And that's a cool give and take, because they started a small business. You teach business. You're a business teacher. You had the wherewithal to loop it back, so everybody's funds of knowledge is sort of on the table there and sort of dovetailing in a way that makes that content come to life.
Yeah, it was cool.
That's cool. Awesome. One other question I had. So I want to talk to people that if someone who teaches multiple grade levels would share. I'm curious if you've seen a different culture across grade levels. So, typically when we talk about culture, we think about race or ethnicity or home language or socioeconomic status. I mean, there's a lot of different ways we could do that. Religion. I'm kind of intrigued with the idea of like a culture of youth. And within that culture of youth, I'm curious if you see different cultures along your grade levels and therefore different funds of knowledge among kids at different grade levels. I'm not sure if I'm making that crystal clear, but I'm curious if you see the different cultures and different funds of knowledge along the different grade levels. So not only are you thinking about a child's ethnic or racial culture, but also their like grade level culture and if that's different. Does anybody have thoughts on that?
Almost all my classes have at least 3 grades, and most of them have 4, 9th through 12th graders. And the difference between a 9th grade boy and a 12th grader is substantial. I have not really, when you first raised the topic, it's a maturity level and an approach to academics and an understanding of how to be a successful student. It's just a lot different between the 9th graders and the 12th graders. And I think one thing, maybe the funds of knowledge application might be to try to find ways to help the freshmen learn from the seniors. I have to say I haven't been successful on that so far. The seniors like to hang by themselves, but anyway, that's my observation. It's not. There's certainly substantial differences, and it's more familiarity with the classroom and how to be successful.
Thanks, Bob. Did anyone else want to share anything about that? Megan, can I put you on the spot and you can talk about it's not an elective, I should remember what the name of it is at the end of the day, but sort of how your upperclassmen mentored or led some stuff with the underclassmen. Am I remembering this correctly or am I getting it wrong?
Oh, I think you were remembering that they were being totally inappropriate to the underclassmen. I had a class called Story Slam, which was an elective writing class that had 6th graders through 10th graders. And the 9th and 10th graders we're all beginning our community culture, and they were not appropriate for middle schoolers. It was a little bit hard. It was a huge learning curve. So yeah, you're right. The younger kids, I feel like the younger kids had to grow up a lot to be mixed in with the high school kids, and the high school kids also had to find some decorum. So, and they've worked it out. I think second quarter we're having far less problems with the age difference, although it is really hard having a middle and a high school together.
Yeah, or even sophomores and juniors, or an old senior and a young senior, or take it in any combo you want. But I think it's important with those mixed groups, and mixed by grade level or by age. This idea of funds of knowledge can really bring people together, or it can really tear them apart. But being cognizant of that when you have such a schism, and a lot of rural schools in Colorado have pretty spread out student populations in the same room. So that's just
I'm excited.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. I was going to say I was so excited that Bob said 12th grade boys are way different than 9th grade boys. I can't wait till they're older. It's exciting. We're building those grade levels up, but 9th grade boys, they're no joke.
That's for sure. I remember those times well. Somewhat unfortunately, it's not an easy time to be an adolescent.
Mm-mm.
All right, I wanted to dive into a few sort of like steps in the process, and this is just me sort of stair-stepping how I think about funds of knowledge, how I thought about funds of knowledge in the classroom. I could have missed a million things. I could be off base, but this is helpful for me. This is big, sort of meaty, sort of really hard work to get started in. There isn't like you got to learn this first, then do this, do this. There are no state standards for these things. But if you're thinking about how to leverage this work, how to build a classroom around funds of knowledge, how to get people sharing about what they do well and their assets, and then depositing all those assets into something rich for the entire group, this is sort of how I think about that progression. So first it's important for you as teachers to share your own funds of knowledge. And you're not necessarily tooting your own horn, but maybe you had a cool job before you went into teaching. Maybe you had an amazing high school experience. Maybe you have a hobby or another profession or a side hustle that's really cool, and the kids will really react to. This is an easy way for you to share, and like from an asset-based lens. I'm good at this. I enjoy this. I want you to know. My first year teaching, when I was really struggling, I was trying to marry like the behavior system with who I really was in the classroom. And that was difficult. But I got some advice from an old sage teacher. They just simply said to me, if the kids are interested in you, they'll be interested in your class. You could change that verb to like, or whatever it might be. If they like you, they'll like your class. But that was really important for me to think of myself, as a human being and not just a robot in front of these kids, and sharing those things that make me, me. Once we could have that connection, then the content would stick. They would try. There would be a rapport. So it's an easy way to just kind of start sharing what you're comfortable sharing. There may be some aspects to our personalities and who we are that may not be appropriate in the classroom or may be appropriate later. You may not be ready to do it. Don't do it until you're ready. Don't force sharing anything. A personal example, I got divorced before I became a teacher, and it took me a while to share that with kids, but when I did, they were interested that A, I had kids, and B, a lot of them were kids of divorce. So it's sort of like we sort of came together around a difficult issue. And I think the kids really appreciated me sharing something delicate in front of them and vulnerable in front of them. That said, I did that deep into year one. If I'd have done that week one, I'm not sure I could have handled it gracefully, and I'm not sure it would have worked out that way. But that is an example to think about. You know, what do you want to share? What don't you want to share? What's the risk and reward in that? I've had some really good friends who are LGBT teachers. Some have chosen to come out to their students, some have not. But it's important things to think about. That's who you are, part of your identity. It could help certain students. It could alienate others. It's all risk and reward. And doing that when you feel comfortable doing that, or never. There's no rule that says you have to share your sexual orientation or your marriage history or anything like that with your students. But it is something to consider and weigh the risk and the rewards. Like in Bob's class, you can SWOT analysis that the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in a decision like that. And then moving on to the next one, you can get your students to share that. And we've heard some examples from you. The passion posters could be a very like surface level way into that. If you teach literacy, it might be easier with kids' narratives and poetry and such to get portals into who they are. But I'm sure in other subject areas, there's ways to do that as well. And then coming out of the survey, I think this is especially interesting. You know, how are you hearing about students' assets? How are you honoring those? How are you sustaining those? If at all, and vice versa, are they seeing that in you? I really think of those questions like my teacher knows what my life is outside of school. My teacher knows what's important to me. I think there are a few others along that lines. But funds of knowledge really seems like an area where you can move the dial on those, and thinking of some of those SMART goals you crafted, leveraging funds of knowledge could be a good way to do that. I say it a lot, but just that idea of thinking as kids as empty vessels and we are teachers filling them up with knowledge really rubs me the wrong way. These kids bring knowledge in. We may need to reframe it. We may need to redirect it a little bit, but they bring all of these assets and they're more than empty vessels. I'm going to pause there just to see if anybody has any good examples or ideas of ways that they've either shared their own funds of knowledge, number one there, or that they've gotten these funds of knowledge from their students and sustained those funds of knowledge that the students have brought out. If you don't have anything to share, that's fine. Right, go ahead.
I can jump in.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm Lauren, also first time in this class, and I teach third grade, which from what I'm hearing seems like it's not super common among the group, but sharing funds of knowledge, I've sort of been doing home visits sporadically throughout the fall, and I teach an ELA-S class, so I have 28 students, 26 are from Mexico, and 2 are from El Salvador, so for them, family is something that is incredibly important as a whole, I think, culturally for all of my students. So being invited into their homes and seeing their families has been something that I know is really special to them. And it's something that as a teacher, I don't necessarily have the opportunity to do. So I've FaceTimed all of my family members and had them talk to my students the same way I've talked to their parents. And they've loved that. So that's kind of me sharing something about myself. In terms of them sharing their funds of knowledge, we have classroom jobs, and my students filled out job applications where they got to share their strengths. So things that they do at home. I have a lot of kiddos who have little siblings. So a lot of kiddos mention that they're really good at taking care of people. They're really good at helping people read. They're really good at helping to do whatever they do at home. And I tried, when I created my class jobs, to sort of tie that into what the jobs were. And they really have enjoyed that, and have taken a lot of pride in their jobs. So it's been really cool.
Do you have a template for that job application? Like, did you have like a form, or did they just write?
I had a form. Yeah, I did.
Cool. If you think about it, you don't have to do this, but you think about it, could you reply to the email with a PLC with us on it if you find that?
Yeah, definitely.
That's a cool idea. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
Any other ideas in either one of those buckets, either you sharing your funds of knowledge or coaxing it out of your students?
One thing that I have done, which I'm going to be honest, has not been that effective, but I think that it would be effective maybe somewhere else. I think that, I don't know, I think that I just think that parents are very, most of my students are in pretty extreme poverty. And so I think that parents are very uninvolved in their students' education in general. And so just that's kind of like a unique challenge at my school, is parent involvement. So I had students give a homework assignment to their parents where they had to write about their strengths and weaknesses, and also their kids' strengths and weaknesses. And some of them did it, and it was really wonderful and awesome, but I did not get a lot of participation. But I think that I learned a lot about what my students know that I had no idea beforehand. So I think that depending on your ability to get parent participation, I think that was like a very, very cool way to do it. And a lot of the parents were very excited about that.
That is cool, especially with how you started, what you said there about, they're in poverty. They might be working a number of jobs. They might not be working a job that's 9 to 5. And just the idea of having teacher conferences in the evening or afternoon, some schools are really flexible with that. It's not feasible for a lot of parents to be there, but it's cool how you provided them a portal to have their voice in that, maybe written, but it's still a portal for them to take part. That's really cool. Any other thoughts about this too?
So I guess a couple things. What I'm sorting out is that it's got to be voluntary, right? I remember it was something in our school that came out where students, most of the students come from one feeder middle school, and a few teachers had sort of welcomed or asked for students who weren't from that school, just to welcome them and try and, sort of acknowledge them. And it turned out the students didn't like that. So I've got a kid in my class who's got an Australian background, which I think is pretty interesting. But I've mentioned it a few times, and it sort of actually came out when we were reviewing the survey that he didn't like that. He thought it was, he didn't like being called out on that score. So I think that's one thing I've learned is it absolutely, obviously something you want to do, but you've got to be sensitive to make sure, especially in a high school adolescent context, that you're not putting a student in a situation where they're feeling like they're different than their peers, which may be something they very much don't want.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good thing to flag, Bob. And yeah, you definitely don't want to push kids to share personal things that may be difficult. A big one for me with the population I taught was students coming out as undocumented. And clearly there's a risk in doing that. It's not ethical to push for them to reveal that. But if they do reveal it, you can hook them up with resources and people who can empathize and help out. So you're right. It's difficult. I think it's setting that culture that, you're open to talking here. If not, that's fine. But I need you to participate in some way. And you can maybe provide different portals for them to share, maybe just one-on-one, draw something, write something, as opposed to sharing out a whole group. But that's a great thing to flag, Bob. You never want to push a kid to reveal that personal stuff that may be difficult for them to share. Cool. Thanks so much for sharing, everybody. I really appreciate it. When you share those stories, I think it really brings this to light and makes it relevant. I appreciate that.
Can I share one more thing? Sorry.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sam.
Mine's actually more of like a question, because like I have some students that will open up to me so much so that I'm like, I have no idea what to do with this information. Like I have some students that have been in and out of the hospital because of suicide attempts.
I have one student that's telling me all this trouble he's getting in with the police and all these other things. And I'm just like, I'm so glad you feel comfortable sharing with me, but I'm just like, I have no clue what to do with that information. Or sometimes like they won't tell me like the reason why that, like when they tell me, oh yeah, I was in the hospital because I tried to commit suicide or something like that. They don't tell me why they tried to commit suicide. They just tell me like that fact. So I don't know how to like encourage them to tell me more, but at the same time, what do I do with that information? I mean, obviously in those kinds of situations, I do tell the counselor, but like, I don't know how to talk to them about it. That's not something I'm not like, well, you really like to share with me, but I have no idea how to help you.
Yeah, great point. So like my personal approach to it was they're like, Mr. Can we talk? Can I talk to you? Sure. And the first thing I would say is, hey, you can tell me anything, but do know I'm a mandated reporter. And that means that if you talk about X, Y, and Z, I do have to tell a school personnel official about that. That just has to happen. So I do want to get that out there before you share anything. But then, yeah, sharing some of the things I felt like I could talk about. Some of the things, my line was, wow, I don't know much about that. It sounds really scary. I would love to research some more information so I can give you a better idea. That was sort of like my go-to line. I had a 7th grade girl the night before. That was one where I was like, well, so you can definitely run into some difficult conversations. But I think not pretending to have the answers, and then letting people know that you are a mandated reporter, that you might have to share something if it involves certain areas. But that's a great question, Sam. And I have 2 kids, and I get a lot of those questions too, and it's hard to find those answers a lot of times as well. Thanks for asking that. Did someone else want to share? I didn't want to cut anybody off. Okay, cool. Sort of the last 2 steps, and these are sort of the advanced moves when it comes to funds of knowledge, is finding ways, cracks in the curriculum, spots in the curriculum where you can respond to those student interests and build the curriculum off that. I built an entire year's curriculum off and that was really cool. It engaged the student a lot. That was really neat. And if you can bring your own funds of knowledge, if they're interested in something you're good at, you could potentially base that curriculum off of that as well. Does anybody have examples of any way they've changed the curriculum? It might just be something very small, but in response to students' interest, where students have expressed an interest, you've pivoted and worked with that.
I can jump in. That's okay.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm getting some fuzz. If you're not, Teresa, could you mute? Something seems to be like running around there.
All right. Yeah, actually, this just happened. Mute. Okay. This just happened to me yesterday and today. We're learning about the French and Indian War. And I kind of briefly went over military tactics, and the students were really engaged and interested in that. So I kind of went off of that. And today we, kind of explored more of how the British were able to defeat the French and Native Americans through certain military tactics. And I tied it into their interests and then how that affects their lives. And it was a really cool lesson. They really liked it. They really enjoyed it. And I feel like they learned some pretty advanced words through kind of building off their interests yesterday. So yeah, that's sort of what happened today and yesterday.
Hey, am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So one thing we did, it was kind of like impromptu when we were learning about the Harlem Renaissance. It actually happened because I had like a technology glitch, but we had been watching some old video of like Duke Ellington. We were looking at some art, and something went wrong with my presentation, so we actually had to stop for a minute. So I just took that time to have some kids come up, like who sang or were artists, and bring up their sketchbook, or just come up and sing a little bit. And like it wasn't planned for, but it was really fun. And it's just like a good way for the kids to, I don't know, just kind of show some of the things they do outside of school.
That's awesome. So you had like a lull or a tech.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, this isn't working, but like the people were all dancing and trying to sing along. So I was like, does anyone here sing? And a couple kids came up and just like sang. A couple kids came up and showed their sketchbooks, and then I was kind of like furiously trying to get my laptop back in order.
Sure.
So like it was kind of like, wasted time, but it was cool though because they got to come up and show off some of the things that they're good at.
And Teresa, I'm sorry, I didn't. I was muted when I was talking back to you, but I think that was a cool idea that you were able to pivot in that moment. Did you have to do a lot of research on like the military strategy used in that war, or did you know that? Did you have to research it? How did that go?
Yeah, so I've always been a bit of a history buff. So I introduced like alliance, treaty, guerrilla warfare, siege, and a couple other terms, belligerent, because that's used to a tactical term that's used. And so we just kind of went off of that. And then we talked about how those certain tactics were used. And then we were actually able to dive into sort of the racial inequality that existed through the use of those tactics. So, and this is an unfortunate part of our American history, obviously, but, I talked to them about how most of the times minorities, were put in situations where they were, shields. And that's terrible to refer to them as that way, but, just talking about those military terms and then pulling in that racial inequality aspect really kind of, pulled my students in. And I love getting asked this question, but they kept asking me, well, what would happen if I lived during that time period? What would happen if I lived during that time period? Because the majority of my students are of color. And so, that put me in a difficult position, especially as a white educator, to kind of answer that question. But
yeah, that's fascinating though. I mean, you're pushing toward, it's sort of a delicate area to be, but it could push to something really cool.
Yeah.
And that sort of brings me to like the fourth level there, which is critical pedagogy, if you've ever heard that term. It's moving to a classroom space where kids know that their assets are being honored. They know that their culture is being honored, but it's also a place where they can be critical of their own cultures. And I use cultures, that could be culture of youth, that could be culture of poverty, that could be brown kids, white kids. It could be like so many different things. But it can get kids to actually look at their own elements and do a deep dive on that, such as the R word that was referenced before, or the N word, which is used a lot casually with student populations. Really sort of unpacking that and them having the wherewithal to see, yes, this is a part of my culture, but there may be some risks or some threats along with this. The expectation isn't that you all get to 3 or you all get to 4. The expectation is that this is a list that I made that is hopefully helpful. And if you want to do more parts of this work, you can sort of start with yourself, start with honoring students. And then the last 2 are sort of like moving together with students to craft this path forward, acknowledging each other's funds of knowledge. It's hard to do. You may not ever get there, but this is sort of how I think about that evolution. And it's how it was helpful for me as an educator. Any final thoughts about the funds of knowledge? I want to do a quick look ahead with our remaining time, but I do want to allow time if anybody want to share anything about anything we've talked about so far tonight or any of the reading that you did earlier.
Just really quickly, one thing I noticed with my AVID class when we were working on our building resumes, basically, is that sometimes students need help actually seeing that they have funds of knowledge. Because I had so many of my students just say, I don't do anything. I don't have any experience. I don't have any of this. And I had to realize I had to dig a lot deeper in the questions I was asking them. And I soon found out that they were babysitting multiple children, and whether it's their siblings or other family members and all these other things that are really important, like actual funds of knowledge that they can use to better advocate for themselves and build a resume.
Would you mind just talking a little bit more about the questions you asked? Like how did you push through, especially with a kid who's shut down and maybe something outside of school is weighing on him or her and making them feel like they don't have a lot of value in this world? Like how did you start that conversation? What were some of the questions you asked to push it further?
I really just kind of took it back to, I said, well, like, maybe you don't have the specific definition of job experience, but like, what do you like to do? And I started talking to one student who went into great detail to how he leads like Dungeons and Dragons, like games, and organizes those. And I didn't know much about it, but I just let him keep talking. And I was like, well, you just explained to me 4 different traits that you can add to your resume. And he was kind of like really amazed that he could like put that on there. And so I just kind of took it back to the basics with them and let them kind of share and talk
Yeah. I like
about
that.
what they like.
Yeah. What are you good at? What do you like?
Yeah.
Yeah. What would your classmates say you're best at? Something like that. Yeah. Those are great ideas. Awesome. Thanks for adding that, Justin. That's important.
Yeah, totally.
Any other thoughts? Cool. I want to look ahead briefly, and then we will end the PLC, and you can do some of the reflection, or you can wait and do it later. But about that reflection, I sent a link to it in the email. There's also a link to it if you're in the slides here under the PLC, and I think there's also one earlier in the agenda. But the worksheet itself looks like this. It's not actually a worksheet, it's just directions, because you can deliver your thinking in whatever way you'd like to. But we have sort of talked on a theoretical level, although you've done a wonderful job giving me specifics on how you've already done this work, and hopefully that's giving us all ideas. I do have some more resources in here. There's a link here to excerpts from 3 teachers, different ethnicities, different cultures themselves, different places in the country, different contents that they teach, talking about how they see culturally sustaining pedagogy and how it plays out in their class. I would like you to read all those. It's not very long. I think it's a total of maybe 3 pages. But there's some good stuff in there. And then there's a video here by Django Paris. He is sort of the education world's authority on culturally sustaining pedagogy. It's a long video. It's 44 minutes long. Please don't watch it all. Please, I want to make that clear. I would like you to watch one of the case studies, and you can maybe watch parts of the 3 case studies, see which are interesting to you. But Django Paris really spotlights work that these teachers have done. There's Rashida, Simon, and Yvonne, and you can find those times listed here. Pick one of those to watch, and then I want you to sort of meld the excerpts you read here, whatever you watched in the video, with your own experience, maybe what we talked about in PLC, just to kind of share your thoughts with me around these ideas. What excites you about this work? What confuses or worries you? And then what specific ideas do you have to actually leverage this type of work? Or if you're already doing some of it, leverage more of this type of work in your class. And that could be a picture. That could be, you could record an Athena video and point me to it. You could record some audio. You could draw a map. Like, I don't care what that is. It could be a paragraph, whatever works for you. I would just like those 3 areas addressed somewhere within it. We do have 2 people on the call that are not technically my ALCs. I'm not your ally, Andrew and Lauren. If you would just share that with your ally when you're finished with it, that would be awesome. You do not need to share that with me. You can share it directly with your ally. Any questions on this worksheet or wrapping up this reflection? Cool. It's intentionally open-ended, like I said down here. You can share whatever you want with me. I just kind of want to see your thinking around it. If it's too open-ended and you're sort of freaking out about that, let me know. We can find a different way forward. I did just quickly want to look forward at the next month. Andrew and Lauren, this may not be 100% accurate to the expectations of your allies. We each have slightly different schedules. So if this is different, go with whatever your ally told you, but I did just want to look at this very quickly. So the PLC, we have that reflection work. I would like that within a week. I think our thinking's fresh. You don't have to get that to me tonight or tomorrow. Within a week would be wonderful. You could email it to me. That's perfectly fine. Our next remote PLC is December 5th. If you're a local person who's in here for makeup, it'll be either that Wednesday or Thursday, whichever time you normally come. But for most of the people on this call, our next PLC will be December 5th. In Haiku, we've opened the Culturally Linguistic and Diverse Education module. This is a very big lift. I feel like it's a very important lift. DPS mandates this training for its folks, for all teachers, because there's a sizable English language learner population within DPS. But if you've looked at the demographics of the state, It's the biggest rising population across the state. That said, this module just isn't about English language learners. It's about best ways to teach vocabulary, specifically academic vocabulary. And as teachers, I kind of see that as our principal job. So if you don't have a lot of students who aren't learning English from another language, they're still learning English as a student. I believe there's an applicable route for every activity in the module if you don't have many English language learners. If you hit something where you're like, man, this really doesn't seem applicable to me, I don't understand how I'm supposed to do this, please just reach out and we can figure a way forward with that. We will be in that module until about mid-January or the beginning of January. It's big. And we've worked very closely with CDE and DPS to create it. Just know that. The due dates, I believe mainly the way that they're scheduled, it's like the first two activities, which is sort of like meaning making or learning are the first two activities. And then there's a plan and then there's a reflection on teaching a lesson is the general flow of how those are due. Those are all on the calendar. They're all on the syllabus. Again, if you have a problem with conflict with scheduling or something, please let me know. We can figure out a way forward. In terms of Athena with the videos, if you haven't done the survey video with your students yet, please do that as soon as you can. And we have another check-in video coming November 15th. I really like the way it worked before. Thank you so much for jumping in and offering feedback to your fellow teachers. I'd like to roll with the same thing. You could either like update how the last problem or issue that you shared is going, or you can throw out something completely new. But I'd just like to hear where you're at, what's going well, what are you struggling with, what would you like some ideas around with that check-in video. Any questions on that? Cool. With that, you are free to go. I will stay on the call if anybody wants to jump on and talk to me. If you have any questions or anything, I will stay on here. Otherwise, you're good to go. Thanks a lot for your engagement. I really appreciate those connections and those ideas of how you've done this work in your classroom. That's cool. Thank you. Chris, did you see my other email about the CLDE stuff?
Yeah. I wasn't sure if I should chat you just now or just ask. So I did see that. I can get you my certification. I don't know how exactly, but someone has it.
Yeah, there used to be a bank at Strive when I was there where like everybody uploaded them. Or if you can just have someone from Strive be like, yeah, Chris has done this, I sign off. And it's not that I don't trust you, we just need some paperwork.
No, I know.
Make sure that's fine.
And then did you, I mean, I could just look back at the email, but did you put like due dates on the assignments for the special education thing?
No, and there's only 3 activities. So like between now and the new year, just
okay.
To do that. And I don't think there's any implementation or reflection. It's all sort of like learning about the different laws, learning about like the different components of an IEP, and then learning about like collaboration with other professionals in special education. It's probably stuff you've done before, but it's important like refresher.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I'll be working on that then. And I know I have like 2 more documents I need to get up from the last one.
I've been a little underwater anyway.